have already transformed the way the world operates. And now I believe we have a chance to do it all again. To be the great explorers of the next era.
Wherever.
You want to say it?
Okay. Good morning. I am Bobby Srinivasan. Welcome you all to this morning to a provocative topic. Is generative AI overrated? We have a rather distinguished panel here today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we have Don McGuire, who's the Vice President, CMO of Qualcomm, Aparna Khurjekar from Verizon, and Eugina Jordan from Telecom Infra. But just a few words on the sort of the topic and the proposition at hand. Obviously, this is evolving, and Moore's law lives on. I think now you're seeing doubling of intelligence now. So that's certainly keeping in pace with what we thought Moore had predicted. But telcos have some interesting questions ahead of them. What do they do here? In the midst of the 5G investments and IoT investments and still monetizing some of the AI investments, what use cases work? What use cases don't work? What if ChatGPT hallucinates in Spanish? How do we deal with this? And all these types of questions. So we're hoping to have a good interactive session over the next 30 minutes and want to leave time in the end for you to ask questions of the audience, of the speakers. So Don, why don't you introduce yourself and sort of address the topic off the bat and then turn it over to Aparna and then to Eugene, if that works.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Don McGuire. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Qualcomm. And regarding the topic, I don't believe generative AI is overrated. I believe it's here to stay, and it's moving very fast, and it's upon all of us to embrace, learn, evolve, and figure out how to best utilize it.
Great.
So.
Hello, everyone. Aparna. So I'm with Verizon, done several, no pun intended, done several hats within Verizon and currently run the small, medium business and SaaS business for Verizon. Is it a hype? It depends, Bobby. If you ask the consumer, Aparna, it's definitely a hype. I mean, my husband did write a really nice poem for me for Valentine's, if that counts, and I can pay it back. But for me, it's a supercharged search story right now as a consumer. But as the CRO for Verizon, for my customers, I'm really, really excited because we've already permeated with data and with AI for the longest time. So we have the science, and Bobby, now with Gen AI, I can pull in the art, and together we can create a lot of magic. So definitely not a hype for me.
Excellent.
Thank you. Eugina Jordan, the Chief Marketing Officer for Telecom Infra project. Is Gen AI overrated? I'm not going to give you a yes or no answer. I'm going to use reference of Gartner hype, and we right there at the top. Let's separate Gen AI for consumers, what we do with Midjourney, what we do with ChatGPT, from B2B. And that is important why we're here and talking. It's not about is Gen AI overrated, but is Gen AI ready for B2B?
Mm-hmm. And actually, that leads to a rather interesting question. You have seen some of the initiatives that the telcos have already launched. The Koreans obviously are probably most ahead of anybody else. The Japanese, the Swiss, some of the Asian, Singapore, they've launched these Gen AI farms, if you will, for the enterprise customers, and so on. There's a great assumption here that let's say you built a incredible Gen AI farm, and you now offered it to enterprise customers. Are operators, in fact, geared to deal with enterprise customers? Let's assume they had the capability and they had all of this infrastructure and compute capability. Are operators indeed well positioned to deal with the business and enterprise segment at all?
I could answer that definitely. So the question is absolutely yes. And you said ahead. I don't think anyone is ahead or not. And you can think about operators from two parlances. One is operator as a provider of LLMs and Gen AI. And operators have a role to play as you think about bringing in the right kind of connectivity, programmable, programmatic connectivity, or then MEC for a lot of the edge inferences, or then private networks. So there's a lot of work that we're doing as operators just to be purveying and pushing out Gen AI. But operators as consumers of Gen AI across network, as we're thinking about planning and spending all those billions of dollars to make sure that we've got the connectivity done right, we're already using it for cell planning and for RF engineering. We're using it for a lot of the predictive maintenance and the analytics that we need to do behind it. So we're starting to push into those already. Perhaps the biggest areas, and this is where your question comes into play, is are we ready to pull it all the way together for the customer? Absolutely yes, because we've been doing that over decades. With a lot of the personalization we see, I'm sure you're going to be talking about some of the marketing pieces, but I'm seeing it already in sales, where we are bringing in the right kinds of solutions for the best action for my salespeople, and what it is that we can do with Gen AI now, with intelligent meetings, knowledge bots, and how it is that we support the right kind of coaching and solution.
Sorry, Don, you.
Yeah, well, I'm not obviously not from an operator, so I can't speak to that. Aparna did a fantastic job speaking to that. But I look at it this way. From a technology perspective, AI, in order for AI to scale, whether it's Gen AI or AI running in the background, it's going to have to be hybrid, it's going to have to be distributed, on device, at the edge, and in the cloud. Because you can't do everything in one place. And depending on the use case, and depending on what you're trying to do, whether it's prompted or whether it's suggestive and proactive, there's certain algorithms and there's certain computational workloads that have to be done in certain places. So we have to get to that point from a technology roadmap perspective where it's not just about everything going to the cloud and coming back. It's not just about promptive and reactive. It's got to be assisted. It's got to be an assistant eventually, and it's got to be suggestive and proactive. So that has to happen, and we're all part of that. But from a CMO's perspective, I've done a lot of talks and a lot of these types of panel discussions around Gen AI, and what I've found and what I've heard is that from an enterprise perspective, about 80% of enterprises are not ready. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to do it. They're afraid in some cases. There's the fear factor. Everybody within the enterprise, whether it's the CIO or the CFO or legal, has their concerns. And then there's the 20% that are moving fast forward and ahead. And we're probably in that 20%. And I'm in a unique position because I work for a company that's been researching, commercializing, and deploying AI for 15 years. It's just been running in the background, and maybe people didn't know it was there, and generative AI sort of thrusted it into the foreground. But then I'm also a CMO, and I have to look at how do I efficiently pool my resources to keep up at the speed of TikTok, right, in addressing my audiences. And we've deployed several tools across Qualcomm, but just in my group alone, tools like Firefly. We are a beta customer with Adobe Firefly. We're deploying Firefly across the creative process. We've also deployed Writer. Writer is an amazing tool if you haven't used Writer. From an acceleration of the creative process and from an efficiency, productivity increase perspective, these tools are game-changing. I don't think I've ever met a CMO who said they had enough human capital, human resources, to do what they need to do to serve their businesses. And this is going to allow us to kind of accelerate what we can deliver for the business and do it in a very efficient manner. So we're all in. And we have a steering committee at Qualcomm where everybody's represented. Before we deploy a tool, it goes to that steering committee. It's vetted from a legal perspective. It's vetted from an IT perspective, et cetera, et cetera. And then once it gets through that process, then it's deployed. And so it's worked really, really well for us, and it's been great.
Eugina, I think there's a number of things that Don brought up, but perhaps you can help us clear the confusion on the difference between AI use cases and Gen AI use cases. From your perspective, how do you see where should an operator be looking at using AI versus where should an operator be looking at using generative AI?
Great question. So we're going to look at the basics of AI, deep learning, and Gen AI. So AI is when you decide to use machine intelligence instead of human intelligence. Your deep learning is how you're going to do it. You're going to use neural networks. You're going to use LLMs. You're going to use LLM algorithms with natural language processing. And Gen AI is what?
Yep.
So what is your images, your maps, coverage maps, your blueprints? So, and if you understand those three aspects, then the next one to understand is what are your objectives? So to summarize what Don and Aparna were saying is there are three pillars in mobile operator or any community, any organization. One is your team. How you're gonna apply Gen AI to make your team more productive. The second one is your network. And what's interesting is Telecom is a very unique regulated industry because they provide network infrastructure for other regulated industries. So network. And again, as other speakers were saying, AI being deployed for optimization, spectrum optimization for many, many years. Remember SON, right? From 15 years ago. And then the third one aspect is your use cases for your customers. For us, as consumers with mobile devices, or your enterprise customers, what do they want to build with Gen AI and how mobile operators, as their enablers, can do it?
And if I may, I can give you
Please.
some examples from telco. So from an AI perspective, we've embedded AI in big tech for the longest time. Some examples are next best action.
Yep.
So as we are going to a customer, what is the best action for that customer? What is the product recommendation? How is it that we do the right kind of smart pricing based on the deal?
Yep.
That's all AI, and we've been doing it for the longest time. Where Gen AI now comes in is, if you're talking about my rep, and I have thousands of them out there in the field, I'm doing sales sequencing, which is a lot more informed, personalized, yet it's email generation, and then responses result in response back from us, which is a lot more creative in
Yep.
its nature. Or then an infobot, that is pulling through RAG models, retrieval and generation, a lot of the data, which as yet was embedded in the alleys of Verizon's databases, right?
So are you saying, Aparna, that the lowest hanging fruit is probably in the customer service, customer experience area, if you were looking at the first use case to deploy, or perhaps look at more marketing, content generation, sales, things of that nature, or would it be the network side, which is network planning, RAN optimization, predictive failure, digital twins? Where would you start if you were an operator that was now going to got inspired by this and said, okay, now we're going to make the first investment, we're going to go deploy the first use case. What should that use case be?
Yeah.
What area would you start deploying?
Yeah. And I would actually change the question, almost reverse it to where are the needs? What is it that you're looking for? And don't get too enamored by is this Gen AI or deep learning or is it ML? Then they bring in the right kinds of solutions for it. So for example, in network planning, when we do cell planning and cell prioritization, we're using a lot of geospatial intelligence now, all tied into Gen AI, or spectral intelligence and techniques. All of those are tied into Gen AI, but we are using it for a reason, for a rationale, for the right ROI. But you're right in that a lot of the use cases and the low-hanging fruits, like you called out, do end up showing in customer service, where we're doing things like smart call routing, getting it to the right individual, and then assisting that agent the right way through guided paths to sell or to service the right way, bringing in the right kind of root cause analysis. There's a lot of AI and Gen AI with next best action pulled together there.
Let's switch another dimension to this, which is employee productivity. And there's a whole debate on the future of the workplace. And there's a debate whether you're going to need to be called employees or roles going forward. And in a future workplace, is it going to be a combination of human workers, digital workers, and robots? Do you subscribe to that vision? Do you think that that's really going to be the future of work? And it's going to be some hybrid between humans, digital workers, and robots?
I think we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right. I think we're still really, really early in this process. But I do not subscribe to the narrative that Gen AI is just going to replace jobs. It's not meant to replace jobs. It's meant to replace tasks. New skill sets have to be learned. Absolutely, new skill sets have to be learned. Whether it's prompt engineering or whether it's learning how to use these tools, digital workers or new workers are going to have to learn how to use these tools. But it's really, at the end of the day, I don't believe, going to replace a tremendous amount of jobs, but tasks. That's going to free up people to actually be better critical thinkers. That's going to free up people to actually have work-life balance. And that's going to also create the opportunity for people to do things like career development or training, things like that. So I see a world where if it's deployed properly, it's really about making people more efficient and more productive and creating a better work environment at every level that is utilizing these tools. We look at how we deploy Gen AI or AI in general at 3 levels. First level is general purpose. For example, Copilot. So we've deployed Copilot across different departments, across different work groups, and across different levels in the organization. And Copilot, for the most part, is a general purpose AI tool. You can use it to create PowerPoints, to summarize Teams calls, and chatbots, right? So whether it's Teams chat or ChatWise, that's sort of general purpose Gen AI. That could be used by everybody across the organization. The next level is really tools that are departmentally significant or relevant. For example, in marketing, what are the tools that are relevant for marketers? In customer service, in engineering. And then the third layer is what specifically are those tools? For coding, for example, GitHub for coding for engineers, or Writer for the comms team within marketing are those specific tools. So the 3 layers of deployment that we've taken on is general purpose, kind of departmental or sort of subject area, and then exact tools. And that's how we've kind of looked at it. And what we're seeing in productivity gains early on is upwards of 20 to 30%.
Yep.
And by the way, we're a 4-day a week in the office company. And so we are a culture of innovation. In order to innovate, you have to collaborate, and true collaboration really has to happen face-to-face and in person. So that is our work culture. And so deploying these tools actually aligns very well with that work culture. Not everybody has the same work culture, but we found that it's working really well for us.
Yeah.
Excellent.
That's very well said. Bobby, I don't see it as a job replacement. It's definitely skill replacement. Definitely about automation, supporting staff augmentation in many ways. What we say in Verizon is pulling out the cognitive load from the sales rep or any individual so that they can be doing more of the complex tasks. So within my shop, what we've done is we've launched a massive, massive undertaking. We call it velocity selling with automation and AI clubbed together. And we've already seen 16% improvement in rep productivity.
Wow.
And that has been replaced with better customer experience now.
Yep.
Right? That space has been better productivity, does bring in more revenue. And that's what we're reaping the benefits from.
Excellent.
Not real replacement, but augmenting.
I'm going to ask you a different question, Eugene. Do you think the industry needs a standard telco LLM? That would be assuming that we take a set of sort of pre-trained model and then fine-tune it for the telecom industry, so at least everybody has the same baseline to start building models. Do you think we need a standard telco large language model?
Great question. And again, it's not going to be a yes or no answer. To successfully implement Gen AI, you need two things. Number one is the right workforce, and the panelists already discussed access to the best tools to train the workforce. And then second one is access to data. Data from all aspects, from your network, from your customer, from your workforce. And then your models, supervised or unsupervised, can act on that data. Let me give you an example about why I think we need to have a specialized LLM in telco. There are two regulated industries as an example, healthcare and telco. Both are regulated, and that's the key. Both have a word like sell. So if telco took a general model that was used by healthcare and used sell to train their models, what's going to happen?
Yeah.
A disaster. So to be successful in developing the right LLM, we need to have the right data. It needs to be open source because it's going to benefit the whole industry. So let's not hoard the data. Let's create an open one. And let's find the ways how we can contribute that data without violating any regulations, any privacy concerns, and adhere to security standards.
Yeah, I so agree with you. It has got to be open source, and it's got to be a standard open source model. Yep. What I would call out is we definitely need the domain-specific knowledge there, but we also need a lot of the proprietary nature of what we need. The privacy and the copyright laws and such need to be accounted for. What I would suggest, though, is I don't know if we want to fit that in the construct of the large language model as it exists today, or models as they exist today. We may need an SLM, a small language model, which is highly curated for us. Or we may need an LAM, a large action model, which is really what I care about, is what is the action, so what? Yeah. So I do think there's more work to be done, but pulling it all together rather than just each individual hoarding the data would make sense.
Aparna, I think you bring up a great point, because I think one of the biggest issues is telcos have data which built on enormous amount of trust with the customers.
Yeah.
When you bring public data and introduce it with telco highly sensitive data, this could be a pretty disastrous situation from a security point of view, right? So I think so your idea of perhaps looking at a SLM, LAM, I think is perhaps a really good one.
And we also need the correctness, accuracy, right? Which LLMs don't necessarily need to be caring about, especially as they're thinking about being creative with art or any other form of content.
And I think you need to decide where the data lives.
Yeah.
Right? So does at the individual level, does the data stay on whatever device you're using, right, to do your task or your tool? Does it live on your private network?
Exactly.
Right? At the enterprise level, where it's protected and secure, or does it live in the public cloud?
Absolutely.
And there's probably going to be arguments for all three of those, depending on what the data is. So I think that's kind of something that everybody has to be thinking about. It's like, where does the data live beyond what data? But where does it stay? Where does it go? Who gets access to it? Who doesn't get access to it? Back to your point about security, privacy, and regulation, all these things have to be taken under consideration.
We have a few minutes left. Any questions from the audience for the panelists? I don't know if there's a mic around that we can pass, but any questions at all?
Don't be shy.
Going once.
There's one question there.
There we go.
Hi Don, thank you. So the discussion was about private network, where the data lives. So what is the motivation and how we can cultivate it if you're talking about a private network?
Generative AI in a private network context.
Oh, like how is it deployed, or?
Yeah. So what would be his question?
What would be the motivation and how we'll just
how
make
could
it?
you
What
use
are the use
Gotcha.
cases?
So I'll give you an example just from our perspective, and then I'm sure Aparna has got a lot to say about this, but especially since Verizon deploys private networks every day. So we've got two different chatbots that we've deployed within Qualcomm. One is entirely trained on only Qualcomm data. So if you're trying to do a ChatGPT-like search on Chatwise, you know that you're only going to get information within the context of the data set that the company, the enterprise has allowed to be in that data set. But we also have deployed Microsoft Teams Chat, which is trained on public data. So depending on what your search query is or what your prompt is, you're either going to go to Chatwise or you're going to go to Teams Chat. But it depends on the context. The Chatwise is only on our private network. It's only trained on our enterprise data. And Teams Chat obviously is trained off the public cloud. So there's lots of other data sets that are used for training. So that's how we've deployed. Same thing for coding. We've got an internal coding tool, and then we have a coding tool that pulls data from outside on GitHub. So we've kind of deployed both private network-driven tools as well as public cloud-driven tools, depending on the context and the need. And that's how we've kind of looked at it so far.
Very good. Yeah, we're seeing quite some models emerge in that private network and hybrid network solutions. And as you look at AI, there's quite some that's happening with private, customized models that are at the edge inferences, and then several which have to go back into either the cloud or other databases. And where Verizon's helping is through the right kind of fabric and infrastructure for programmatic switches as well as routers that can prioritize for the right kind of prioritized traffic management, especially as you're thinking about distributed private networks. And then also, definitely within the private network, how does a edge compute solution show up? So lots of emerging technologies there and solutions showing up.
So I would contribute around the data aspect, because mobile operators, they will provide the infrastructure for private networks. So there will be one LLM set of data. Depending on the industry, if it's private network for healthcare, if it's private network for Department of Defense or military networks or schools, there will be a merge of different LLMs to meet the needs, objectives, SLAs, and it will be, again, used via supervised or unsupervised models to deliver on the results of that particular enterprise.
Any other questions? One in the back there.
Thank you. Claire Holobosky from Enders Analysis. I was wondering how you address the issues behind the lack of accountability in generative AI outputs.
Yeah. So explainability, and I see it not just with Gen AI, even with AI. So we have churn propensity models, and I was just explaining that understanding why someone is in a high decile to churn versus not, you got to have transparency and explainability so that you know exactly how to act and work it. With Verizon, it's a big problem. It's a big opportunity. With Verizon, what we're doing is we're setting the right kinds of guardrails. You were talking about governance models and such. So what kind of data goes in and how it is that we can start thinking about the outputs in the parlance of the data that's being fed in. That, in conjunction with just the bias that can show up with the kinds of data, I think it all starts with bringing in the right kind of data and then the right kind of explainability.
Yeah. And also, we look at accountability from a how is the model trained, first and foremost. So a tool does not get deployed in our enterprise, unless our legal department is comfortable that how the training algorithms that are both legal, that the content and the data is either open source and or it's been licensed. In the example is Firefly, right? They've licensed with Getty Images, so the data that you're going to receive from using that tool, it's secure, it's safe, it's legal, and then the ownability is part of the accountability on the other side of when you're getting an output from whatever tool you're using. You can't just take that output verbatim and then put it out into the world. You have to create ownability around it. So in the creative process, for example, these tools are great for ideation and for kickstarting the process, but you have to add the human element on the other side. You have to add that editorial aspect if it's something that's text-driven or copy-driven. You have to add that visual artistic element if it's something that's visual or content-driven from a video or a photography perspective, in order for us to own it. If we don't add that human element, we can't own the content and the output, and then it just gets out into the public cloud. Our legal department has been very clear. We have training sessions. Everybody has to go through training. So that's how we've kind of deployed accountability in how we use these tools. How they're trained is something that's been a huge concern. And so we look at that on the front end before we deploy a tool.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but I really want to thank the panel. This has been a good session. I want to thank the audience for setting in the first as soon as you entered the show this morning. But thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.